Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everybody.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer tips, insights, ideas, and examples for how small, emerging, and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can build their business. Everything from determining if you're ready to grow, where to start, how to prove it online, or how to go about securing distribution at a national retailer, driving your business through to the end consumer, or how to go about finding an investor if you're ready for that aspect. Bottom line is we would love to help you be successful by highlighting the many important aspects of this journey to establishing and growing your brand. Tracy and I have been doing this a long time. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we've done a few good things, so we're here to help you. Please follow our podcast on iTunes or Spotify, leave us a review, and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. Tracy?
Bruce and I have been involved in consumer packaged goods commercial operations roles for over 30 years. We define commercial operation functions relating to sales, marketing, trade marketing, broker and distributor management, agency selection and management, new product development, brand acquisition and divestitures, and customer management. We also invite on our episodes friends and former colleagues from all aspects of the Road to Retail process to come on the show and offer their opinions and experience. Again, we encourage you to subscribe to our iTunes or Spotify channel at Road, 2 Retail. Today we have a special guest, but before we get to Doug today, Bruce, would you like to share with our audience our sponsor for today's
episode? Absolutely. Today, you've heard Tracy and I say many times on this program that getting on the shelf isn't the victory. It's getting the product off the shelves and out the door in the consumer's cart that's going to make your product take root and grow. The best way to accomplish that is with advertising and marketing, and that's why we are so pleased to have Media Manager Marketplace as one of our cornerstone sponsors on the Road to Retail. Media Manager Marketplace specializes in helping brands maximize the reach and impact of their advertising dollars by making sure that your precious marketing budget is spent on the right media mix to match your brand's demographics. And if you think this is going to cost millions of dollars to create a national TV or radio marketing campaign, then think again. Media Manager Marketplace can get your campaign started for far less than you might imagine. Their expertise in using the right blend of advertising to help drive demand for your product could be the difference between a 90-day trial and a national rollout of your brand. Buck Robinson, the president of Media Manager Marketplace and an industry veteran of over 30 years, will personally review your product and offer his free assessment. Email him directly at buck@themediamgr.com. That's Buck, like a dollar bill, at themediamgr.com. Big day, Tracy, a sponsor, and the only thing bigger than Media Manager Marketplace is welcoming Doug Radi to the show. Absolutely. Doug, welcome. Doug is the president of Sweet Loren's Cookies, the #1 better for you cookie dough brand in the U.S. Doug, welcome. And if you don't mind, give us a little more on your background, how you got here, and how you and Loren are contributing to my expanding girth with your delicious products.
Happy to. And Tracy and Bruce, thanks just a ton. Really pleasure being here. And I love the fact that you talked about making a lot of mistakes. We'll talk about some of my mistakes today, I'm sure, and look forward to sharing any wisdom I have for your audience. Just as a way of introductions, I'm kind of a classic CPG MBA. I got my MBA from Wake Forest and spent the first 7 years of my career in large cap CPG, PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, Bayer Consumer Care, in OTC healthcare. But I made a pivot at that point into the natural foods industry, and I've spent the last 21 years up here in Boulder, Colorado, working in natural foods on some amazing brands. I mean, brands like Horizon Organic, Silk Soy Milk, Rudy's Organic, Good Karma Foods, and now Sweet Loren's. And Bruce, appreciate the shout out. Sweet Loren's is the #1 better for you cookie dough brand in the United States. It's the #3 brand overall behind Nestle and Toll House. And we've really pioneered and revolutionized this better for you movement in the refrigerated dough space. It's kind of happening across the grocery store, but millennial Gen Z consumers, allergen friendly, allergen seekers, have just walked by that category for a long time because there just haven't been any options in that category for the new modern consumer. And Sweet Loren's is the brand now they go to for that. And we're better for you ingredients, clean label, non-GMO, none of the top 9 allergens. And Bruce, the reason that the girth is going to come on is the cookies taste amazing. No trade-offs in terms of taste, unlike a lot of other gluten-free categories. So happy to be here. I'll leave you with, it's kind of funny if somebody said, hey, how do you articulate your career? Steve Demos, who's the founder of White Wave and Silk Soy Milk, one time when I first met him, he coined, he goes, Doug, he goes, you're welcome to Boulder. Happy to have you here. The thing you don't realize about yourself is you're a hippie stuck in a suit. And he was related to my CPG, kind of large cap CPG. And what we'll talk a lot about today is I definitely have a strong entrepreneurial mindset. In combining those two skills, I think has been fabulous in this industry in building emerging brands and building businesses. So I give Steve Demos all the credit for that, but it is a perfect articulation of kind of who I am. I'm definitely the shortest hair hippie you'll see, but an entrepreneur in a CPG body, I guess, is a way to think about it.
I love it.
Well, that's great. That's great, Doug. And you might find out on your website, I keep applying for the taste tester job there at Sweet Loren's, and no one responds to me. So that's probably good for my long-term health. Tracy?
Absolutely. Well, again, Doug, welcome. So let's talk a little bit about more about your experience. I know you've been, president or CEO of several small emerging brands. So tell us, what's the best advice you would give a small emerging brand, starting out? And, what was the best, maybe one of the best early moves you made on one of the brands that you worked on?
Yeah, I think, so I'm a strategist by heart. And so I always go back to say strategy first. Mm-hmm. So what does the brand stand for? How's it differentiated? And what I think is the most important question to answer is, how are you going to win in a competitive marketplace? So my friends and my family or the farmer's market says these are the best cookies ever is not strategy.
Yep.
So you really need to understand your marketplace and what position, unique position, how do you drive incrementality in the category, and how do you stand to win in that category? We'll talk velocities kind of throughout this thing, but if you can't, and you even said this, your sponsor is all about creating demand and pulling product off the shelf. If you can't create velocity, you will never live on the shelf for a very long period of time. So having that strategic understanding of who you are, who your brand is, how you're going to compete and win, how big's the marketplace, and then take it to execution after that, I think is really important. So that's number one. Number two is I find in emerging brands, in entrepreneurial environments, a lack of focus can be incredibly damaging. So I always talk about the shiny penny phenomenon. It's like you're walking along and, hey, look, it's a penny, and you forget, hey, I'm going to the biggest job interview in my life, but I have to stop and pick up a penny. I mean, that doesn't work, right? So focus is going to be really important, not to get distracted by the next interesting idea. So and the other aspect of focus is when you do get distracted or look at doing something else, it dilutes your execution. Like, most companies can only do a few things really well. So if I'm trying to do A and I'm trying to do B, and A and B are very different, I'm fractionalizing my resources, I'm diluting my resources, I'm diluting my team's focus. So focus is going to be critical. And then the last thing is resiliency. I mean, these are the hardest things that you'll ever do. Many founders, many CEOs write books about how lonely it is and how damaging this experience can be to their personal health and mental health and physical health. And it's absolutely true. These are the hardest things you'll ever do. They're wicked hard. There's a reason 90%, 95% of all businesses fail in the first 24 months. They're hard.
Yeah.
So, but having a strategic plan, an understanding of who you are, focusing can make those things easier. But resiliency, you got to have. These are very hard, and they're going to be grinding you out. And so those are the kind of the three pieces of advice. The fourth one is, and it's even more relevant later, is you got to have margin. If you don't have variable margin in your cost structure, you can't charge enough for your product to have a positive 50% plus gross margin to be able to pay for some of the other stuff we're going to talk about today in terms of investment in a brand and how do you decide when to go to retail and all that stuff. And even more importantly, now investors are not funding businesses that are required to fund business losses. They want to fund growth.
Right.
And so you got to have margin in these businesses to survive. Back to Steve Demos, it's like, hey, margin is the thing that gives me the right to survive another day. Back to their resiliency thing. So, you got to have margin. You can't have a business that is negative, a variable negative, or not able to invest in that business over time. So that would be the fourth piece of advice I have, and even more important today than ever before. Although it's funny saying that because, it's like business school 101, right? So, those are the things you got to definitely focus on.
So Doug, one thought on that is how does a brand balance having a strategic plan, but also being flexible and being able to pivot if they need to or make adjustments? So
Good question.
How do you balance that?
Yeah, and actually, I find many times in our industry, the resiliency grinder mentality is an opposing force to the strategic question. It's like, if I just try harder, if I just grind this out for longer, I always think you just got to step back, right? Step back for a minute. I think all of us as CEOs or founders should look back and say, I need to be the hardest grader in the universe.
Right.
Because everyone around me is going to tell me how great I am.
Yeah.
You got to have this self-reflection to say, am I really winning? Do I really have the right to win? Hey, everyone loves my cookies and I get social media posts all day long, but am I winning in velocities? And so I think there's sort of two ways to think about adjustments. There's the strategic one, and that is, am I on track? Can I make this business as a business that stands for something and has scalability? And then there's the other adjustments that I call are more tactical. So the strategic ones, you got to be your own worst grader and say, hey, am I tracking to what my expectations are in terms of the business and how I'm going to compete and win? The other tactical stuff happens every day, and you should do that. So the information, the learnings are constantly flowing in. Hey, I did that shopper marketing program and it had no ROI. I'm not doing that again. I'm going to pivot and do something different. But that doesn't change your strategy. Your strategy is still going to be, I want to build the number one better for you cookie dough brand. I'm just going to change tactically how I execute that. So I think there's a balance between how you think about strategic and tactical, and strategic ones should be thought seriously and methodically and cautiously. Tactical ones just keep going, keep optimizing, keep going. Yeah. And that's the way I'd kind of think about adjustments as you're kind of building these things.
I love that. So test and learn.
Absolutely.
Well, but also to understand, as Doug was saying, that, your initial plan, there's a chance you might be wrong. So you got to be able to alter course. So
yeah,
Doug,
the other aspect to that is there's this art versus science thing going on as you're thinking about this, because most small businesses aren't data and insight rich, right? They're not buying every piece of data. So depending on how much analytical insight you have, it has to be balanced with the gut insight and being able to sort of judge both of those things to know when you're wrong, right? So, it's always there's a lot of uncertainty relative to big CPG. There's a lot of uncertainty in these small brands. that require art and science. And that's what I'm saying to operators and commercial leaders is sometimes your gut can be a great asset and sometimes it can be horrible. So you always got to kind of go across that spectrum of analytical and qualitative and quantitative insight to be able to sort of judge where we're going from there. And back to mistakes. I mean, we all make them. I've made a ton, relied on my gut too often, relied on data too often. And I think that's just part of this process. There's just a lot of uncertainty. You got to be comfortable with this.
Yeah.
True. So Doug, over the course of your career, as you've grown these brands and inherited them at different stages of their life cycle, what are the watch outs that either you check yourself on or that you would offer as counsel to brands either thinking of entering brick and mortar distribution or expanding? Do you have any, either battle scars or a couple of things that just always seem to hold true?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's two really that I hear over and over and that I've faced as well in my career. I think everyone underestimates the costs and the amount of investment it takes to be successful in retail.
Right.
So really understanding the true costs of executing a retail plan and strategy. I mean, there's slotting fees, there's other fees, there's deductions, there's spoils, there's term discounts, trade, and that's not even now I got to put trade money, so, and there is this pay to play thing going on at retail. It just is. So if you can't fund pay to play, and then even more importantly, fund the investment behind the growth of that business, you'll always be underwater in your P&L. You'll always be swimming upstream. So I think that's one area that, and that we didn't even talk about distributors and so all of the sort of middle person hands in your pocket just to get from you to a retailer. So I think the cost is one area. The second one is expanding distribution before you're ready. And nothing drives me crazier than when I talk to businesses and all I hear is, I'm in this many doors. I can pay for doors all day long. That doesn't mean that I have a successful business. I will tell you, Sweet Loren's just reached the #1 cookie dough velocity in the entire category at Wegmans. I can use that to sell doors all day long, right? So, I think velocities are the most important thing to trigger expanding to new stores. I always talk to my teams and every business I look at or I've done due diligence on or have advised on. I really want to know where my velocities in the category rank in quartiles. So if typically the conventional brands are always dominating the upper quartile. And, they just work off of larger household penetration, everything else. So, but if you're an emerging brand, a better for you brand, and you can live somewhere in that first or second quartile, maybe the bottom of the first quartile, second quartile, there's not a high likelihood that you'll ever be discontinued at that account. You serve a specific purpose, bringing in unique consumers to the category. Space to sales is working. You're generating more penny profit because you're premium. There's a lot of benefits to a category manager having you in that space. If you're in the bottom two quartiles, especially the bottom quartile of velocity, you're on the D list. You're going to be delisted. You're on the cut list for the next review. So, you have to look at velocities as a trigger to when do I expand distribution next. Anyone can woo a category manager and say, hey, I love this brand. But if you're not moving on shelf, that's not a sustainable business.
Right.
So, I always counsel people the costs of getting in and competing and playing there. And then you got to have velocities that sustain on shelf.
So a couple of things just to recap before we press on here. So Tracy and I talk all the time, Doug, about what you just said, underestimating the costs. And that means your entire P&L, because once you go to brick and mortar, if you've made an error on your estimates, your buyer doesn't want to hear about it.
No.
Your buyer doesn't want to hear that's a you problem, not a me problem. Next, that bottom quintile or quartile, that bottom 20 to 25% of SKUs, man, that is a tough neighborhood to live in. All right. You got to do everything you can to get out of there. And if you're housed there right now, Tracy, who usually dresses as the Grim Reaper, would be glad to remind everyone of the costs of failure.
Yeah.
So, Doug, pressing on this a little bit. So let's say you start thinking that, wherever you are, you're ready to go to brick and mortar retail. How do you pick that first retailer? Is it a regional strength? Is it a demographic match? Is it both of those plus 6 other things? How do you think of that? Because we hear people that are like, so-and-so is going to give me a meeting. And Tracy and I go, they're a buyer. They get paid to give people meetings.
Yeah.
What you need to do is have the right meeting.
Yeah, I think that's right, Bruce. I think there's a number of criteria that I sort of throw in the blender on this one, and this one I think is a composite of these things to decide whether you want to go to that meeting and pursue that distribution. I mean, one is I always like, as an emerging brand, retailers that support innovation in emerging brands versus retailers that don't. And you can really tell that by walking through the store, and do they have enough of a assortment of better for you categories? Are they committed to merchandising those segments? Kroger was always sort of the early one when they had the natural department, and then they started to integrate the natural within the set, and they put side wings, and they use the color green, and that's a good example of a retailer that supports emerging better for you product categories and brands. So that's one thing. Second one is, do you fit with the premium consumer? If I'm selling super premium product category X, I don't go to Walmart first. So making sure it's a fit, for us, and no surprise that we're the #1 selling cookie dough at Wegmans. There is a perfect consumer fit between our brand Sweet Loren's and the Wegmans shopper. So that's one. The third area of criteria I look at is just brand development. Is there a geographic development? I talked about consumer development. Is there a supply chain linkage? If I'm an East Coast manufactured business and my distribution centers in the East Coast, the cost to serve to the West Coast is significantly higher than picking a retailer geographically close.
Yep.
So that's another thing I look at. And then the last is retailers where I can support the velocity growth of the business. The shopper marketing world, and every retailer wants you building their profit pool by spending money in their media, in their shopper marketing, and their couponing. Not all of them are created equal. So ones that are really good at targeting the right consumer, that you can have an efficient spend with a high ROI and return on your dollars that moves the needle at shelf. That would be the other criteria because back to what you said, I mean, you have to support this. You can't just put it on shelf and expect that it's going to turn.
True. Yeah.
What do you guys add in there in terms of retailer first, second, third kind of approach?
What we kind of recommend is to take where you're located and draw a circle 500 miles radius, and start there. Start regional. So if you're an East Coast brand, as Bruce gives the example, no offense to Bash's', but you probably don't want to get distribution at Bash's' in Phoenix.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing we always talk about, Doug, is, especially those that don't have all the CPG scars that the three of us do, is going into a retailer, fill in the blank. If it's a logical fit demographically, getting a 200 store test and kind of working through the kinks is better than getting full chain and failing. I mean, when you think about the cost and the cash outlay to build that inventory, ship it, wait for payment, and then go to St. Patrick's and light candles and hope that it sells through. I mean, that's not, to your point about planning and being methodical. I mean, we've all been through this. It is hard. If someone comes in and says, "I'll give you 1,000 stores," it is hard to not get excited. But
Right.
it's
Right.
even harder to take a fastball off the forehead and go, that kind of hurt. Tracy?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially depending on the entry costs. Everyone forgets you got to have about 60 days of working capital, maybe 90 to make this work because you're probably underscaled. So you have unfavorable terms with your co-packer, right? And then on top of that, you have unfavorable terms with your retailer and they won't pay you when they say anyway. And the distributor then deducts a bunch of stuff and all of a sudden you realize, holy crap, I sold a bunch of stuff and didn't get paid for 90 days. And the other part to that, Tracy, with the geographic, I mean, imagine like a 10% EBITDA margin for an emerging brand, pretty solid number, right? I mean, it's hard to build EBITDA early in these processes. Freight, especially if you're in a temp control freight environment,
Mhm.
that example you use could be 15 points of margin difference. So it's a difference between generating positive EBITDA and losing quite a bit of money. So I think it's super smart to think about it the way you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about expanding distribution. So when you're looking at that, Doug, do you guys look at, expanding your current SKU line into other flavors? Or do you look at innovation? How do you look at expanding your distribution in your current line of products?
Yeah. It's as a student of the trade and a strategist, practically every research paper you can read from, BCG to McKinsey, whatever, says your core is going to generate all of your financial returns. So the answer to this question is you stay with power SKUs and you try to build your core. If you think about like, do I expand to another section of the store? Do I move to a different, even temperature chain? All of those things get dilutive. Back to my focus point. If most of the research you read that they say every time there's a departure from an adjacency to your core, it's multiplicative. So by the time you sort of get a couple layers out, the success on your core could be 80%, but then you go out, 2 or 3 adjacencies, and that could be different geography, different buyer, different department. I mean, it
Right.
just goes on and on what those could be. Your chances of success get much, much smaller. So I'm a big proponent of maximizing your core. And if you think about throughout your P&L, what that does, it helps with trade, right? Now I can have it. It helps with shelf presence. And like we've done a bunch of studies, even at Sweet Loren's, when we moved from two SKUs on shelf to 3 to 4 to 5, the velocities on every SKU go up. Why? Because it's just better shelf presence. Like you're just intersecting and intercepting the consumer in a more productive and powerful way. So expanding your core in that sense, then I'm making more product with the same co-packer. I'm shipping more stuff on the same truck, right? It just, there's synergies throughout your P&L. So find the most productive SKUs and get them in the set all together, I think is the first strategy that I think about. Make sure they're in that upper quartile or two. Then figure out, leverage what's working on your core, right? And so in Sweet Loren's last year, we launched a seasonal program. The baking season and the dough category has a lot of seasonal and varietal behaviors in it. Yeah, I'm a chocolate chunk cookie dough shopper, but it's pumpkin season. I'm looking for pumpkin. So we incorporated its core because we do cookie dough all day, every day. We do it really well. But adding a flavor of pumpkin and then leveraging the retail environment around pumpkin season and then gingerbread season and chocolate mint season. And now we're in market with a spring lemon flavor. It adds to your core and it really adds to your business. So those are examples of how I think about building core first before you move out into other adjacencies.
The other example there, Doug, when you talked about taking your power SKUs and going from say 2 to 3 to 4 in the shelf of an existing retailer, that also helps you minimize missed sales from out of stock, right? Because if you only have one facing with 3 pieces and you have a nice program going, or if you have a TPR going, people buy those 3 pieces, and some places only get trucks twice a week.
Right.
So now you're promoting to an empty shelf. So
Yep.
man, lots of moving
Great
parts.
insight.
So let's, Tracy, I'm sorry, were you done?
Yeah, I just said great insight. I love
Yeah.
that strategy.
So Doug, now let's flip over to a bit of the pressure against the consumer. So like you were saying, and we've been talking about getting in, and we've interviewed buyers who say, guys, I talk to these brands and they're literally like high-fiving when we say we're going to give them a shot. And I tell them that the work has only now just started.
Yeah.
So talk about what tactics have you seen are strong and powerful that you can kind of really bank on, no pun intended, for a small emerging brand who's got really precious dollars? What have you seen kind of work more than once?
Yeah, so it's funny. I started my marketing career in the 1996. So it was all mass marketing back then. I've done $50 million ad campaigns in my career. We used to laugh back then. Hey, the nirvana of marketing is when you can have a one-to-one relationship with a consumer. And it's here. It's been here for a while. So today's marketing dollars and tactics can be tracked, attributed, and directed to a single household. And I think I was just reading an article that a couple of big CPGs are pulling back on mass media, on television campaigns. And the commentator sort of was like, why are people not gravitating faster to connected TV? You can target an ad impression to one single household. And the production is getting so much more efficient. I've spent $1 million shooting one television campaign. We just shot 2 ads for $20,000. So, you can move much, much faster. So I like, there's 3 areas that I really like. And I think they all have to be grounded in your targeting and positioning strategy. So, make sure you're targeting the right consumer, because you can target a single consumer. And that'll help with efficiency. But there's 3 areas. I still think earned media in today's PR, influencer, and social platform world, earned media that you're not really paying for is still very powerful. There's a lot of influencer brands, and they're getting very quick awareness. And I'm not saying necessarily partner with an influencer. You can do micro influencers, you can do all the way up to the big ones. And there's a spectrum in there that I think can work for every brand. So it's efficient. Number 2 is, I still think shopper marketing. I think you got to execute at the shelf to get that unit purchased and velocities moving. So, different retailers have different levels of sophistication, but all of them have improved dramatically. I love 8451 at Kroger. I think they're a data company and they know what they're doing. There's others that can do it. Others are not so good. EDLP, EDLC, customers like Publix, they're great operators, but you don't want to do BOGOs all the time to build your business. So,
No.
You have to look at that spectrum. And then I love this connected media world. My wife and I were just talking about a vacation the other day, and lo and behold, they're always listening, so they know everything about you. I was getting an ad for a vacation spot on my television. So it's connected TV, streaming media, directed at my house. And then because my credit card that's paying for Hulu is also, they're checking it and watching for the transactions, they know if I'm spending money on that item or not. So we know conversion. So I can syndicate messages to single households, and then you can watch their credit card to see if your item was purchased or not. So you can actually get down to that level of specificity to make sure your dollars are moving. So I love where the technology is going. There's a ton of companies doing it, and they change every year. Like, it just gets better and better and better. And I'm not even an expert in it anymore. But those are the things that I really like in terms of building these brands. You no longer need to go to a category manager and say, I have a $20 million marketing campaign behind my new piece of innovation. You can show them how you're executing against the consumers you want to bring in. And it's really powerful. So for example, back to the comment about Sweet Loren's, Gen X and baby boomers are the vast majority of purchases in the category. It's kind of an old, stodgy, not a lot of innovation. The blue cans have been there forever. Cookie dough's been there forever. The Pillsbury Chub's been there forever. And so the retailers and the industry hasn't been great at bringing in that new modern consumer. Well, when we do that and we get in distribution and we do some of these marketing execution tactics and we show, for example, that 50% of all Sweet Loren's buyers are new to the category. That's like
Oh, huge.
And yeah, I mean the retail buyer, because the category managers all know that baby boomers are dying off. They got to refresh and re-energize these categories. And so through this marketing and how do you drive demand and really being smart about the right consumer, and then that turns into an insight like that we're bringing in a vast majority of new shoppers. That's powerful. So that's how I think about marketing tactics and driving kind of your brand strategy and making sure that everything's synced.
So one of the things, Doug, that Tracy and I always try to drive home to everybody is a category manager is sort of interested in your brand, but they're really interested in the performance of their category. So that if you're bringing them information that they either couldn't possibly know, or you're showing how they're going to expand their sales, their share, their margin, suddenly, you boil to the top of their returned email list, et cetera. So real quick, Doug, one more point on this. What tools do you use to track how your marketing dollars? I mean, obviously, sales is at the top, but I mean, are there ways that, as with a small emerging brand, aside from spending $9.8 million with one of the syndicated data services, that you can tell people about?
Yeah, I mean, most of these marketing firms that are either doing Shopper, you could do something like Instacart if you do direct connected TV, connected media, all of those will give you sales attribution. So, I mean, they're data companies. So,
right,
that's kind of part of the investment you get. And so in addition to sort of looking at how velocities are going or household panel and tracking, your household penetration, your buy rate, your purchase rate, et cetera. I love just looking at ROI based on sales attribution for the tactical spends you're doing. I mean, I think those are very powerful pieces of insights.
Yeah. Good. Great insight. So let's talk about sales, right? Our favorite topic. So talk about the decision process you make in the difference between maybe hiring your own direct sales force or hiring a broker. A lot of the times the, founder, we talked a little bit before the show about, Loren selling into public. So a lot of founders try and do it themselves. So what's the decision process and your thoughts on direct sales force or broker?
Yeah, I've heard brokers are a necessary evil a lot of times in my career. I actually kind of flipped that on its side. I think they're a necessary tool and asset, but there's a right way and a wrong way to execute that. First and foremost, you can't replicate what the broker team brings to you. You can, but it costs a ton of money.
Right.
So I just think when you're early in your growth cycle, leaning on an outside strategic partnership like a broker is really important. Now, that being said, because brokers bring coverage, relationships, strategic knowledge, strategic insight, a lot of things that you don't have in-house. And again, it would cost you a lot to do that. So that being said, though, I think two things. Brokers are carrying a lot of brands in their bag. I think we have a tendency in emerging brands to say, here's the 9 things I want you to do. That never works with brokers. You got to show them, here's 2 things I need this year. This is what your business plan, this is what you're executing this year. No more than 3. you just won't get their attention. So you got to fight for their attention, but you got to do it through focus. So back to my focus theme. The second thing I always say is do not leave it up to brokers to strategically sell your business. No one can sell your business better than you. So if I'm calling on Doug's Market down the street, broker, go nuts. Here's your sell sheet. Here's your talking points. But if I'm calling on one of the top 20 retailers in the US, I'm on that call. So I don't leave it up to a third party who doesn't and can't sell your business as well as you can to do that. I leave it up to that party to help me, develop those relationships, give me strategic insight about how to win and build a business there. But I do the selling with them, but mostly by myself, right? I push. And so that's the way I think about the broker relationship. And then as you build your career, I still think, or your firm, you still need that broker. You're just never going to get the coverage until you're building a very large internal sales organization. I mean, you're talking a couple $100 million plus until you're even, that's even in the realm. So that's the way I think about brokers.
Yeah.
Well, another point to add on brokers, Doug, and I'd be interested, quick, if you agree with this, is to your point, even if you're a couple $100 million, you can't afford the coverage that a good firm and partner can give you. One of the things I like is they are in that retailer's office a lot.
Yeah.
And they're talking to a lot of people. So they will get a whiff of smoke signals. If there's going to be personnel changes, a strategy change, they'll find out way before you will that a category review date has been accelerated or pushed back due to a change in personnel, a maternity leave. I mean, a lot of softer things the broker can deliver that you just can't. You can't even dream of the little nuggets you'll get just from staying in touch.
Bruce, it's even further than that. Most of the big wins in my career have been examples where I had several touch points and opportunities to give the category manager information. It rarely happens that you show up at the door and you get a big win, in one meeting. So that's the other, but with the standing meetings that brokers have, with the relationships they have, it gives you multiple opportunities outside of the category review to do your job, to get business done. And whether that's a separate, out of cycle meeting, if that's hey, I'm just seeding you with, bits and pieces of information to get you excited about the brand. There's lots of opportunities the broker has out of review meetings to impact and positively affect your business.
I couldn't agree more. So let's switch gears here to something else. So with a small emerging challenger brand, you need an outstanding product. You need a flexible, good plan, but you also need some cash to make it all go. So can you share with the audience, what you've learned either being directly involved or on the periphery of fundraising? When do you go for it? What do you look for in an investor? Maybe after all this time you've been in the business, like what are your warning signs? It's like, whoa, that was like the worst first meeting ever. I don't care how much money that person might give me. Life's too short.
Yeah. It goes without saying, and I know you guys are hearing this over and over, the funding environment has changed dramatically versus, a couple years ago. When I first got into the industry, there was a big gap between kind of private friends and family funding to the first Series A institutional, and there wasn't a lot of funding in there. So it was really hard for emerging brands to sort of bridge to that, getting up to $10-20 million in revenue. Over the last 20 years, that's like there's the flow of capital in that middle section and venture funds and everything else, crowdfunding. There's a bunch of tools that get you there. A lot of that's dried back up. So it's a really challenging environment. Most investors want to invest in growth stories with good margins and profitability. They want to invest in growth, not in losses. So it certainly is a challenging environment right now. So my advice always for the emerging brand operator is make sure your shop's cleaned up. Make sure that you're on a road to profitability or at profitability. because without it, it's going to be a difficult run. That being said, investors can fuel growth, and that's what we're all trying to do. So, I always kind of think about it in a couple fronts, like cultural fit. Do we have the same philosophies about how to grow businesses
So
like
important.
this? Do they, are there enhanced capabilities? I kind of laugh, like every private equity firm that I know and love most of them, I know a bunch of people that can help. Well, some do and some don't. So really pulling, getting under the hood with them and understanding what you need the most help with and what can they offer the most of. So I think the capability enhancement is an important area. Connections kind of goes with that. Do they have connections that can, unlock growth or unlock profitability? Because at the end of the day, you really want partners, not investors. That's the way I think about it. Are these folks that I'm going to be sitting down with at a boardroom, like a senior team meeting, or just on the phone, kicking tires on things? And I feel like they're real partners at the table and helping us accomplish what our goals are for the business. So that's the way I think about it. In terms of first meetings, it's so funny. The first meeting you have with a potential investor should never be about the investment. If you're at that point and you're at fundraising and you're meeting somebody for the first time, it is not a good way to start that relationship. I think building those relationships, understanding who they are, this takes time, right? You're literally talking about getting to a financial marriage with someone, and you want to understand that just like you would understand someone that before you enter into a social, a real marriage. So that doesn't happen in one meeting. So I love investors that want to just get to know you. We're in a great situation where we've been profitable 7 years and we have no institutional capital in the business at all. We have a healthy balance sheet. We don't need funding. But that doesn't mean that I don't still build relationships with investors. There's opportunities that come up for all of us, and we may say, hey, here's an opportunity we want to talk about. I want that conversation to be among people I know. So, I think in terms of finding the match, it's about having not only a first meeting, but several meetings before you're even talking about an investment opportunity. So that's the way I proceed here. And I always urge everyone to build strong relationships before the fact.
Yeah, we hear a lot that ideally it's more than the check. It's value added capital, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Tracy?
Yeah, absolutely. So one closing thought we have is tell us about your greatest accomplishment or success in your career.
Man, that's a tough one. I'm a grinder and I'm a tough grader. So I sort of never give them. Maybe I've gotten an A- from my own grade book. So it's a tough one for me. I think a couple things. I mean, listen, I've worked on some really fun businesses. I've helped build some great brands. To me, I think my greatest accomplishment is I've worked with some great teams. I've helped build them, but really the team builds the team. I always say the team is everything. I'll take a great team on an average idea, a B plus idea over a crappy team on an A grade idea any day of the week. Listen, at the end of the day, I sort of have two simple rules for my life. I only want to work on some fun projects with really great people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it just kind of goes back to, I think, I don't know if it's an accomplishment per se, but I love surrounding myself with really amazing people. I mean, we have an amazing team at Sweet Loren's. I love working with Loren, one of the most strategic, driven, smart business people I've ever been around. It's just fun being around people like that. And we've built a full group of every function that we feel the same way about. So, that to me, I think is an accomplishment. That I enjoy. And being a grinder, I just like making an impact, right? So, as long as I'm sort of making an impact on fun projects with great people, I consider that a huge accomplishment. It's not necessarily about being up on stage, getting accolades as much as it's about what kind of impact did we have together.
That's
All
awesome.
right, Doug. So now, since you're a hard grader, maybe this is easier for you. Where would you have liked the do-over at some point in your career? When you look back, you're like, what in the
Um,
blazes was I thinking?
is this like an 8 series episode? Because I think this could go on
No, but
forever.
it is kind of like Saving Private Ryan. It's 5 parts.
Oh man. I I think in the past, like I always approach building these businesses with kind of an eye towards enterprise value, but not really. And what I mean by that is I want to build a great sustainable business with longevity, that can live forever. And whether there's a transaction or a liquidity event or a transfer of ownership, or I transition off and someone transitions into my role, I've always thought just about building the best possible business that can last for a long time. Um, Now, being in the private equity world, that's not really how it works. There's fuses and things like that. And so, even though I build it for the right kind of spirit and principles, and that there sometimes these transactions have these ins and outs that you're like, oh, I wish I would have thought of that, or I wish I hadn't done that. And so that's probably, as I think about a do-over, there's these outcomes that haven't kind of gone our way. Selling Good Karma to Dean Foods when we really didn't understand, one, they were bordering on a financial area of distress that eventually became a bankruptcy. And two is their vision for supporting our brand and what we thought they were going to do were two totally different things. So just really understanding, and I always say this, really, so everyone's like, hey, I got a deal, I got a term sheet, but there's so much in it that isn't written in it. So I think you got to be really smart about the terms and conditions, and what do you really want as a brand owner or business owner or even investor, versus what your partner investor wants, and making sure you really think through all of those things: the structure of the deal, the steps, the transition, who gets to make what calls. A lot of times we spend more time on just getting a term sheet with a valuation and a little less on that stuff. And that's probably, in hindsight, the thing I've learned the most is spend a lot of time thinking through all that. And,
Yeah, deep breath and then hammer through the details.
yeah, yeah, you know,
So
and
Doug,
you see
our
that a
time,
lot with founders, right? That get sort of pushed out for various reasons, and they didn't sort of understand the deal. So I think
to
it's really important, as you think about some of the do-overs. That's
yeah, to
definitely
your point about talking about getting distribution at a retailer. I mean, sometimes when they get the acceptance, they stop listening. So you get a term sheet and you stop thinking, and then all those things happen. So
Yep.
Doug, our time with you grows short. Thank you for your time. Just a couple more quick things. So who do you think has had the greatest influence on your career to date? I know you're a young fellow and there's probably, 30, 40 more years in front of you, but who do you look back on and say, man, I learned a lot from that person, or they really provided a beacon that, I try to stay true to?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bruce. There's really three people, or two groups of people. One was my mom. She was a single mom of three boys for a while, and she is the biggest grinder I've ever met in my life. Her resiliency, her ability to just put her head down and get through situations. That's where I learned that. So in terms of being an entrepreneur and a emerging brand builder, that's an asset that she gave me. So that's one. And then, the other group is I've worked with some amazing CEOs, two in particular: Jane Miller, when I was at Rudy's Organic Bakery. And she was CEO of Lily's and had a couple other really great businesses. And then Chuck Marcy, who was the CEO of Horizon Organic when I was there. Um, Great role models, great mentors. I've learned a ton from them. I've involved them in other businesses I've been in since then. Just great human beings on top of all of that. So, I think finding mentors, especially, going back to my comment about this being kind of a lonely, hard business, I think surrounding yourself with really good thought partners that aren't necessarily an investor or a team member or board member, just these outside people. And whether it's an executive coach or mentors like I've had with Jane and Chuck, just really having those resources, like when I'm really hitting the wall on something, or I'm just like, oh gosh, what do I do? There's some really smart people around you that can really help you through situations. So those two in particular have been great friends, great mentors, and huge assets to me.
Yep. No one does it by themselves.
No.
Tracy?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Doug, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Extremely insightful, great advice. So tell us how our small, emerging, and challenger brand audience can get a hold of you.
Yeah, so LinkedIn's the easiest. Probably just look me up, shoot me a quick note saying you saw me on Road to Retail, the most amazing podcast in the world, and I'll definitely respond. You can also reach me at doug@sweetlorens.com. And it's funny. My joke when I was running Good Karma Foods is I'm here to help, because you can't run a company called Good Karma and say no to anybody. But that's more my principle in philosophy than it does, have anything to do with Good Karma Foods. I really do believe that, I've learned a lot, and my part of my job in life is to give back to others and help as much as I can. So reach out anytime.
That's awesome. Bruce?
Great. Well, before we go to the big finish, I want to once again thank our sponsor, Media Manager Marketplace. Please reach out to them to find out how they can make offline channels like radio and television help your product really move off the shelves. The earlier you bring that kind of powerful mass marketing into play to create awareness and demand for your product, the more likely you are to see your retail accounts stick and grow. So don't wait. Contact their president, Buck Robinson, directly. He will personally review your product and offer his free assessment. Email him at buck@themediamgr.com. That's Buck, like a dollar bill. He will stretch that baby for you. Doug, thank you so much. TP, the big finish, buddy.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much, Doug, for joining us on our episode today. Please follow us on Spotify, iTunes. Look for this episode on our LinkedIn post as well. And if you feel like this has been a great conversation, which it has, please share it with others that you think would benefit from us. So thank you again, and be careful out there.
Good luck out there, folks. Hey, everybody. Let me tell you about our sponsor, Media Manager Marketplace. You've heard us say many times on this program that getting on the shelf isn't victory. It's getting the product off the shelves, out the door, and into the consumer shopping cart that's going to make your product take root and grow. Best way to accomplish that is with advertising and marketing, and that's why we're so happy to have Media Manager Marketplace as one of the cornerstone sponsors of the Road to Retail. Media Manager Marketplace specializes in helping brands maximize the reach and impact of their advertising dollars by making sure that your precious marketing budget is spent on the right media mix to match your brand's demographics. And if you think it's going to cost you millions of dollars to create a national TV or radio marketing campaign, then you need to think again. Media Manager Marketplace can get your campaign started for far less than you might imagine. Their expertise in using the right blend of advertising to help drive demand for your product could be the difference between a 90-day trial and a nationwide rollout of your brand. Buck Robinson, president of Media Manager Marketplace and an industry veteran of 30 years, will personally review your product and offer his free assessment. Email him directly at buck@themediamgr.com. That's Buck, like a dollar bill, and he will stretch that baby for you at themediamgr.com.
Again, we encourage you to subscribe to our iTunes or Spotify channel at Road, the number 2, Retail.